It is Friday, April 2nd. Welcome into the Friday edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube. My name is Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Hope you enjoyed your opening day of baseball. If you're a Brewer fan, I know you did. But this is not a Brewers podcast. This is a Packers podcast, either fortunately or unfortunately, dependent upon what side of the fence you are on. But let's talk some Green Bay Packers, and more specifically, let's talk about Tyler Lancaster. And with Tyler Lancaster, that was, of course, Green Bay's re-signing this week, the guy that they brought back. And I've been kind of just monitoring the comments because I've been kind of intrigued as to how people would take this re-signing. I think we should probably start off by saying that the re-signing one way or the other doesn't really move the needle all that much. This upcoming 2021 season is not going to be decided whether or not Green Bay signed Tyler Lancaster or not, but I do think he is a valuable member of this defensive line if used appropriately and if he's in the right spot that he needs to be on this team. And more on that in just a moment. But interestingly, I've seen more negative than positive, which I guess if I'm looking at social media, I should come to expect. But I've seemed to see more negative comments about Lancaster re-signing than positive. And I'm sure some of that stems, of course, of him being more of a run defender and Green Bay's run defense not exactly being great the last couple seasons. But I don't see that as a true, negative completely on Tyler Lancaster in any way, shape, or form. And again, it's worth stating here that Tyler Lancaster is not going to be the guy that is making impact plays, rushing the passer, getting to the quarterback. He is the true lunch pail mentality, grind it out, do everything he can just to make the team and make an impact when he can on Sundays. There's value in that, but again, he's not going to be the guy that's your true ultimate playmaker. But that's okay for what they've been basically asking him to do these last couple seasons. So before I kind of jump into my whole thought process here, let me get into how I've graded Tyler Lancaster over the course of the last few seasons. Again, most of you know I grade every single player on every single play throughout the entire course of the season. I tabulate those grades. I've been doing it for 4 seasons now. And basically, through my last 3 years of grading Tyler Lancaster, in 2018, I had him as a plus 0.4 grade. In 2019, I had him as a negative 1.85. And this past season, I had him as a plus 1.4 grade. Now, a 0 would be a neutral, meaning he had a basically neutral impact on the game. Not good, not bad. Obviously, anything in the negative is bad. Anything in the positive is good. But a 0 score is a neutral score. So he's graded out as a negative 0.05 over his 3 years as a Packer. Basically, an exact neutral type player. But there is a huge difference between a neutral player and a bad player. For instance, Kevin King, just in his NFC Championship game alone, graded as a negative 4 point something. I forget what it was at this point, but below a negative 4 in one game. That's obviously very, very bad, but it just goes to show you in one game, you could have a negative 4, grade. And that was my second worst grade I've ever given a defender. But for Tyler Lancaster to have basically a neutral grade over 3 seasons tells me he's doing some good as well. He's not just performing negative. He's not just this albatross. He's not just, a waste of space or a waste of a roster spot. He's at least not hurting your team. And when you start talking about your 4th, 5th, 6th defensive lineman on your team, if you're getting neutral level production from the back end of your rotation, that has a lot of value. Now, if Tyler Lancaster needs to be bumped up and all of a sudden is your 2nd or 3rd defensive lineman, that's when you start to see the negative connotations come in. That's not where you want him playing. You don't want him playing 30, 40, 50, 60 snaps per game. That's not helping your team. That's not helping Tyler Lancaster. But if you can get him playing about 15 snaps per game, maybe 15, 16 snaps per game, that's a really good spot for him, especially if it's in obvious rundown situations, goal line defense, 4th and 1, 3rd and 1, early downs where they're more likely to run the football, especially early in the game. If you're down, or if you're down late in the game and the other team's trying to run out the clock in 5-minute offense, those type of situations, Tyler Lancaster can help you in. And you might say, Andy, I'm listening to your podcast, but I've watched Tyler Lancaster these last few seasons. He is not a neutral level player. He is a bad player. And whatever. And you don't have to trust my grades. And I've said this multiple times over and over and over and over. My grades are not the be all end all. They are just frankly not. I don't think that highly of myself to say, I've said it this way, so that's it. It must be that way. I don't. But let's take a look at what Pro Football Focus has said about Tyler Lancaster these last 3 seasons. So you go back. He had a 74.4 grade in 2018. So their neutral is 60. Their neutral grade is a 60.0. So they had a positive grade on him, actually a fairly decent positive grade on him in 2018. They had a 57.2 grade on him in 2019. So I had a negative 1.85. That's almost an apples to apples. We both had a negative grade, slightly below neutral level grade on him in 2019. And in 2020, they had him as a 66.4 grade. So a above average, again, 60 being average, an above average grade at 66.4. In fact, they actually had him as their 58th rated interior defender this past season. You might say 58th, that doesn't sound that great. But remember, there's 32 teams. Every team, at minimum, is playing at least 2 interior defenders. So there's got to be 64 starters. That means that he's grading out as one of a second best interior defender on any given team. That has a lot of value. So it's not just me that's saying, listen, he's had some value to this team and he's at least playing at a neutral level or a slightly above average level. Pro Football Focus, who again is also grading every player on every play, is saying the exact same thing. So this is a player, again, in limited playing time. He's played about 1,000 snaps over the course of the last 3 seasons combined, which is actually even, I think, a little bit more than you would ideally want him at. He's averaging about 20 snaps per game. Ideally, you'd like him at 15 snaps, and again, in those obvious rundown situations. But as a 5th or 6th defensive lineman who has a specific role and can come in and eat blocks and protect Chris Barnes and protect Kamal Martin and help out, Kenny Clark on the interior, I like that deal for Green Bay. So I have no issue here. And in fact, if you're getting him near the league minimum, I really like this deal for Green Bay. And this might be the only deal, again, all offseason so far that I can say I really like this deal for Green Bay. Again, if they paid him $1.8 million, closer to that $2 million mark, then I might have some question marks. But if it's near the league minimum, there's a lot of value with what Tyler Lancaster brings to the team. Now, the counter argument to that might be, well, Andy, if you're taking a 5th or 6th defensive lineman, do you not want it to be somebody, even if they're filling just one role, do you not want it to be somebody who you can develop and has a little bit more upside? And I think that's fair. I think we know what Tyler Lancaster's upside is, right? I don't think Tyler Lancaster is all of a sudden going to have this massive breakout and have 20 sacks next season or just be this unstoppable run defender that nobody can block. I hope I'm wrong. That'd be great if all of a sudden he developed into something like that. But I think he's just going to be this rotational 6th defensive lineman that if you play in the right situations, you can get some value out of him. So I do think, yes, in an ideal situation, your 5th or 6th defensive lineman is going to be somebody that you maybe has some upside or potential. But let me ask you this. That's basically been Montravius Adams the last few seasons, who has not been able to help the team and never developed. And you've actually paid him more than a league minimum salary anyway, because you spent a 3rd round pick on him. So in an ideal situation, yes, you would have somebody like a Tyler Lancaster that can actually play a role, help you, and have some, eventual upside. But when you look at a 53-man roster, the back end of that roster just needs some guys who are punching a time card every week, doing some dirty work, never are going to be a Packer Hall of Famer, never are going to be a star, never going to play 40, 50 snaps per game, never going to be a starter, but can just help you win football games. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes, is that these type of players actually have value too. And again, when you're looking at him and you're looking at his pass rush stats, if you're using him too much, it's not going to work out. He's literally had 17 pressures in 3 seasons and about 2 sacks in about 500 total snaps. That's basically 1 pressure every 33 pass rush attempts, which is not good at all. So, I mean, he's maybe getting 10 pass rush snaps, maybe not even that, like every game or so. So, once every 4 games, maybe he's actually getting 1 pressure on the quarterback, which again is not a high-end player, is not something that you want to spend a ton of money on. But if he can help you and not be bad, and again, I can't tell you how many players I've graded with hard negatives over the last 4 seasons. Those are the guys you want to churn out. When you get somebody who can actually go out and perform on the field and not embarrass themselves and not lose you games, especially in clutch situations, there's value to be had there, and that's what Tyler Lancaster is bringing to the team. And last but not least, as I kind of wrap things up here, I know we've had this connotation around the Packers defense that their run defense has been bad the last couple seasons. And for the most part, that is very, very correct. In 2019, their run defense was abysmal. In 2020, it started off not great. But actually, through the last 7 games of last season, they were much, much better against the run with guys like Kingsley Keke, Tyler Lancaster, Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Preston Zadarius, Rashawn Gary, doing the heavy lifting up front, taking on blocks, and doing a much better job within their scheme. Now, it took an entire defense as a whole playing better sound defense, more gap sound and assignment sound, but the defensive linemen up front played well. In fact, Tyler Lancaster only had 1 negative grade from week 8 on last year. And as you look at the last 7 games of the season, they played some pretty good running backs. Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, Derrick Henry, DeAndre Swift, Michael Davis, Cam Akers, Leonard Fournette, and Ronald Jones. It's not like exactly like a Pro Bowl list of, or a murderer's row of running backs, but you've got some damn good running backs in Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, and Derrick Henry on that list, to say the least. And Mike Davis had a great season last year, and we know how dangerous Fournette and Ronald Jones were throughout their playoff run. So this is a pretty good group of running backs. And in the last 7 games of the season, they held opposing running backs to 505 yards on 134 carries, which is 3.77 yards per carry, which is a really good run defense overall, and only 72 rushing yards per game. So their run defense came on as the season went along. And again, Tyler Lancaster was a part of that. And of those 7 games, only one team had their running backs go over 100 yards. That was the Tennessee Titans. They had 101 yards. They held Derrick Henry to 4.3 yards per carry, and his longest run of the day was 10 yards. And oh, by the way, Green Bay beat them 40-14. So their run defense was better than you probably remember towards the end of last season. And I think, again, as you look at how this defense played towards the end of the season, I can understand why they want to bring some of these players back and kind of get the band back together and try to put together a better performance when it matters most in an NFC Championship game better than what we saw against San Francisco and Tampa Bay these last 2 seasons. So the last question I have here is where does that contract come in at? Again, if he's around $1 million, or less per season, I think, for this one season, I think that's a really good deal for Tyler Lancaster. If not, I have some question marks as to just, there's one thing to have value around a league minimum deal. It's another at like 1.8, 1.9 million, where maybe you could use that somewhere else. So I am still interested to see this, but overall, I'm expecting it to be near a league minimum, and I think this is a really smart and sound decision that Green Bay made to bring back Tyler Lancaster, especially with the depth or the lack thereof along the defensive line. And remember, if it is near a league minimum deal, dependent upon how much they guaranteed, it may not even be a guaranteed roster spot. Could just be something where he has an opportunity to earn his job in camp, and if you go out and get 2 or 3 defensive linemen in the draft, he's going to have to earn his spot. So it's not, at this point, we just don't know enough from a contract standpoint, but overall, I think where Green Bay was at from a depth standpoint and what we've seen over Lancaster the last 3 years, at least based off of my grades and Pro Football Focus's grades, this was a good deal and a good value for Green Bay. That's going to do it for me. Happy Friday. I hope everyone enjoys your weekend. I'll be right back here tomorrow on Saturday for a brand new video. Make sure to check out the audio version of today's podcast with Maggie and Andrew and Kyle. We kicked off our draft season, so we're going to be covering draft topics every day all throughout April. We shifted up the teams a little bit, so it's going to be absolutely phenomenal, and we're going to get you covered for all things draft. So make sure to check that out if you have not already. Subscribe here if you have not. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.